I was filled with excitement at the prospect of spending Christmas with my husband Antoine's family, despite past tensions with my mother-in-law Gazelle. I sincerely hoped that the holiday spirit would bring peace and harmony. In the days leading up to Christmas Eve, I put my heart and soul into the preparations, determined to make the evening unforgettable. On the morning of December 24th, I woke up at dawn. Our little Parisian apartment was silent, with Antoine still asleep. I made some coffee and sat by the window, watching the snowflakes fall softly over the city's rooftops. This year would be different, I told myself. This year, I would finally be part of the family. With renewed energy, I began wrapping the gifts I'd carefully chosen for each member of Antoine's family. For Gazelle, a silk scarf from a fashion house she adored. For Jean-Pierre, Antoine's father, a rare edition of a book on the history of Burgundy, his native region. For Antoine's brother, Mathieu, and his wife Sophie, a box set of fine wines, and for the children, educational toys that I had spent hours selecting. "Are you up already?" Antoine's sleepy voice startled me as he approached and hugged me from behind. "Are you sure you want to go? We could stay here, just the two of us." I smiled, touched by his concern. "No, I'll be fine. I want it to work this time. It's important to me. To us." He nodded, though he didn't seem completely convinced. "Okay, but promise me that if it goes wrong, we'll leave." "I promise," I replied, crossing my fingers behind my back. The drive to the family home in the Paris suburbs was quiet. Antoine focused on the snow-covered road while I mentally rehearsed the topics of conversation I had prepared. Gardening for Gazelle, politics for Jean-Pierre, and the latest films for Mathieu and Sophie. I felt ready. When we arrived, the house was already buzzing with activity. Children's laughter echoed from the garden, where a snowman was taking shape. Gazelle greeted us at the door with a smile that I wanted to believe was genuine. "Antoine, my darling," she exclaimed, embracing her son before turning to me. "Isabelle, you're looking well." "Thank you, Gazelle. I brought a chocolate log, your favorite, if I remember correctly," I said, handing her the carefully wrapped cake. "Oh, that's nice," she replied, taking the box with her fingertips, as if afraid of getting dirty. "But I've already prepared one. Tradition, you understand." I felt my smile falter, but pulled myself together. This was only the beginning. The evening was still long. Inside, the atmosphere was warm. The fir tree sparkled. Tinsel lit up the living room, and the scent of cinnamon and orange wafted through the air. Jean-Pierre greeted us warmly, a glass of wine in hand. "Ah, here they are at last. Come, come, warm up by the fire." I spent the next hour helping in the kitchen, listening to Gazelle talk about her preparations. I nodded and complimented each dish, but despite my efforts to engage her in conversation about her garden, she remained distant, responding in monosyllables. Dinner was finally served. Sitting between Antoine and Mathieu, I did my best to join in the conversations, laughing at family jokes I only half understood and nodding at anecdotes I had heard dozens of times before. "So, Isabelle," Jean-Pierre said between bites of turkey, "how's your job going?" "Still in advertising?" "Actually, it's digital marketing," I corrected gently. "It's going very well, thank you. We just launched a campaign." "Ah, these modern things." He waved his hand dismissively. "In my day, we didn't need all this stuff to sell." Antoine's hand rested on mine under the table, a silent gesture of support. Despite these little jabs, the meal passed in a relatively peaceful atmosphere. The children enthusiastically recounted their encounter with Santa Claus at the mall. Sophie talked about her plans for the coming year, and even Gazelle seemed to relax after a few glasses of wine. As we ate dessert, Gazelle's log, not mine, I dared to think that maybe, just maybe, things would work out. Perhaps this Christmas night would mark a new beginning in my relationship with Antoine's family. When the clock struck midnight, the children's eyes lit up. "Presents!" they shouted in chorus, rushing to the tree. "Easy, little monsters." Mathieu laughed as he followed them. We all gathered around the tree, excitement palpable in the air. I watched in delight as the children tore open the wrapping paper, their cries of joy filling the room. Antoine opened my present, a vintage watch he had long coveted, and kissed me tenderly. "Thank you, my love," he whispered. It's perfect. One by one, the gifts were distributed and opened. Gazelle feigned surprise at the scarf, but I saw her stroke it appreciatively with her fingertips. Jean-Pierre was more demonstrative, immediately leafing through his book with a smile on his face. As the euphoria of gift-giving gradually subsided, I realized with a twinge of sadness that none of the packages had been intended for me. I looked around, perhaps hoping for a forgotten gift, but there was nothing. "Well," Gazelle said, standing up and smoothing out her dress, "I think it's time to put all this mess away." I swallowed hard, trying to mask my disappointment. After all, presents weren't what mattered, were they? The important thing was to be together as a family. As I bent down to pick up pieces of wrapping paper, I heard Sophie whisper to Matu, "Don't we have anything for Isabel?" Matu shrugged, glancing furtively at his mother. "Mom said she'd take care of it." Those words hit me like a punch. They had discussed me and decided not to offer me anything. It wasn't an oversight. It was a deliberate act. I felt tears welling up in my eyes but forced myself to hold them back. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Raising my head, I met Gazelle's gaze. Her expression was a mixture of triumph and thinly veiled contempt. At that moment, I knew that no matter how hard I tried, I would never really be accepted into this family. The Christmas spirit I had so hoped for had failed to break down the barriers. As the evening drew to a close, I wondered how much longer I could put up with this situation. How many more Christmases would I have to endure before I was finally considered one of them? The silence that followed the distribution of gifts was deafening. I sat in the middle of this family that still didn't accept me, surrounded by crumpled gift wrap and scattered ribbons. The excitement of Christmas had dissipated, giving way to palpable tension in the air. Antoine looked uncomfortable, glancing back and forth between his mother and me as if searching for a way to calm things down. But what could he say? The damage had already been done. "Well," Gazelle finally broke the silence, "I think it's time for a nightcap before bed. Isabel, my dear, could you help me clear away?" Her sweet tone fooled no one. It was an order disguised as a polite request. I nodded silently and rose to accompany her into the kitchen. My legs trembled slightly under the weight of contained emotion. In the kitchen, Gazelle began to put the dishes away in the dishwasher with brusque gestures. I could feel her disapproval emanating from her like a toxic aura. "Gazelle," I began softly, "have I done anything to offend you?" She froze for a moment, then turned to me with a cold smile. "Offend? No, my dear. Why do you think that?" I took a deep breath. "It's just that I didn't get a present tonight. I thought maybe—" "Oh," she said, waving her hand as if it were an insignificant detail. "Don't be so materialistic, Isabel. Christmas isn't all about presents, you know." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. Materialistic. Me, who had spent weeks choosing the perfect gifts for each of them. "It's not about materialism," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. "It's about inclusion in family." Gazelle noisily placed a plate in the sink. "Family? Listen to me, Isabel. You're not family. You're the woman Antoine chose, and we respect his choice. But make no mistake, you're not one of us." Her words took my breath away. I stood there, speechless and unable to respond. So that was it. After 3 years of marriage and all my efforts to fit in, I was still a stranger in their eyes. "Gazelle? No." She cut me off. "You want the truth? Well, here it is. You're nothing without us. Without Antoine, without this family. What would you be? A simple office worker with dreams of grandeur. You already have more than you deserve." Her cruel words echoed through the kitchen. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Just then, Antoine entered the kitchen. "Everything okay in here?" he asked, sensing the tension. "Perfectly fine," replied Gazelle with a forced smile. "Isn't that right, Isabel?" I could only nod, my throat constricted by emotion. Antoine looked at me with concern, but I looked away. I didn't want him to see my pain, my shame. We returned to the living room, where the rest of the family was gathered. Jean-Pierre was serving cognac while Matu and Sophie chatted quietly in a corner. The children had been put to bed, their new toys carefully arranged under the tree. "Ah, here they are," exclaimed Jean-Pierre. a little cognac to round off the evening. I accepted the glass he handed me, grateful to have something to keep my hands busy. The alcohol burned my throat, but it was a welcome distraction from the pain in my chest. Conversation resumed, light and superficial, as we talked about our plans for the new year and upcoming vacations. I was there, physically present, but my mind was elsewhere. Gazelle's words looped in my head. "You're nothing without us." I looked at Antoine, laughing at his father's joke. Was it true? Was I really nothing without him? Without this family that despised me? I had sacrificed so much to fit in, to be accepted. I had set aside my own dreams and ambitions to meet their expectations, and for what? To be treated like a stranger, an intruder at their Christmas table. The minutes stretched on, and I could feel Gazelle's gaze on me, triumphant. She had won. She probably thought she had put me in my place. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Antoine stood up. "I think it's time for us to go," he said. "Thank you for this evening, Mom, Dad." The goodbyes were brief and tense. Gazelle kissed me on the cheek, her overpowering perfume almost suffocating me. "Merry Christmas, my dear," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. In the car on the way home, the silence was heavy. Antoine drove, focused on the snow-covered road, while I stared out the window, the Christmas lights blurring through my restrained tears. "What happened?" Antoine finally asked. "Between you and my mother in the kitchen." I took a deep breath. Should I tell him? Should I repeat his mother's cruel words to him? But why bother? It would only create more tension and conflict. "Nothing," I replied softly. "Just a misunderstanding." Antoine gave me a sidelong glance, clearly unconvinced. "Isabelle, I know my family can be difficult, but they'll accept you eventually. It just takes time." "How long? How much more time? How many humiliating Christmases will I have to endure before I'm considered worthy?" We arrived at our apartment, and Antoine parked the car and turned off the engine, but neither of us made a move to get out. "I'm sorry about the gift," he said finally. "I should have made sure my mother—" "That's not the gift," I interrupted. "That's not the point." "So what?" I turned to look at him, my eyes shining with restrained tears. "Antoine, do you think I'm nothing without you? Without your family?" He looked at me shocked. "What? Of course not. Why would you say that?" I shook my head, unable to explain. How could I make him understand the pain and humiliation I had felt? How could I tell him that his own mother considered me nothing more than an opportunist? "Isabelle," he said softly, taking my hand in his. "You mean everything to me. My family. They'll eventually see what I see in you." I promise his words were supposed to comfort me, but they only made my pain worse. Deep down, I knew it was just wishful thinking. Gazelle would never change her mind about me, and as long as she saw me as an intruder, I would never be truly accepted in this family. We went up to the apartment in silence. As Antoine headed for the bedroom, I stopped in the living room. Our own Christmas decorations now seemed to mock me. The little fir tree in the corner, the garlands hanging on the walls, everything reminded me of the disastrous evening we had just had. I sat on the sofa staring into space. Gazelle's words still echoed in my head. "You're nothing without us." Was it true? Had I really lost my identity and worth trying desperately to fit in with this family? That Christmas night, which should have been filled with joy and love, had revealed a painful truth. I was an outsider, an intruder in the life Antoine and I had built. For the first time since our marriage, I wondered if I had made the right choice. Had it all really been worth it? As the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, I made a decision. Things couldn't go on like this. Something had to change, and that change had to start with me. The first rays of sunlight were filtering through the curtains in our bedroom when I woke up. I hadn't really slept. To tell the truth, Gazelle's words had looped in my head all night, haunting me like a cruel refrain. "You're nothing without us." Antoine slept peacefully beside me, oblivious to the turmoil in my mind. I looked at him for a moment, his serene face in painful contrast to the chaos of my emotions. How could he sleep so peacefully after what had happened? Without making a sound, I got up and went into the bathroom. The mirror reflected back the image of a woman I no longer recognized. Her eyes were rimmed, her complexion pale, her shoulders slumped. Where had the strong, independent woman I had been before I met Antoine gone? The woman who had dreams and ambitions, who wasn't afraid to speak her mind. It was at that very moment that something snapped inside me. A wave of anger, frustration, and determination washed over me. No, I wasn't nothing. I wasn't just Antoine's wife or Gazelle's unwanted daughter-in-law. I was more than that. So much more. Without further thought, I went back into the bedroom and took my suitcase out of the closet. My hands trembled slightly as I began to throw clothes into it. "Isabelle?" Antoine's sleepy voice startled me. "What are you doing?" I turned to him, a pile of shirts in my arms. "I'm leaving, Antoine." He straightened abruptly, all trace of sleep gone from his face. "What? But why? Where are you going?" "I don't know yet," I replied, continuing to fill my suitcase, "but I can't stay here anymore. I can't pretend everything's okay anymore." "Isabelle," he said, walking over to me and putting a hand on my arm to stop me. "I know last night was difficult, but we can talk about it. We can work things out." I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes. "No, Antoine. Your mother's right about one thing. I'm not myself anymore. I lost who I was, trying desperately to fit in with your family." "But my family loves you," he protested. I let out a bitter laugh. "No, Antoine, they don't love me. They tolerate me. Your mother made it clear that I'm nothing to them." Antoine's face darkened. "What exactly did she say to you?" I hesitated for a moment, then decided he deserved to know the truth. I told him word for word what Gazelle had said in the kitchen. As I spoke, I could see the anger and disappointment on his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered once I finished. "I didn't realize how hard it was for you. I should have stood up for you. I should have said something." "It's not your fault, Antoine," I replied softly. "But that's just the problem. I don't want you to have to defend me. I don't want to be a burden, a source of conflict between you and your family." I closed my suitcase with a decisive gesture. Antoine watched helplessly. "Where are you going to go?" he asked again. "To Marie, probably," I replied, thinking of my best friend. "Just for a few days. Time to think." Antoine nodded slowly. "What next?" I took a deep breath. "I don't know, Antoine. I really don't know." He approached me, taking my hands in his. "Isabelle, I love you. You know that, don't you? No matter what my mother says, no matter what my family thinks, you're the one I chose." His words touched me, but they weren't enough to erase the pain and humiliation of the day before. "I love you too, Antoine, but sometimes love isn't enough." I grabbed my suitcase and headed for our bedroom door. Antoine followed, clearly torn between holding me back and respecting my decision. "Wait," he said suddenly. "At least let me go with you to Marie." I shook my head. "No, Antoine, I need to do this alone. Please understand." He nodded reluctantly. "All right, but promise me you'll call me when you get there and that we'll talk soon." "I promise," I replied, my throat tight. As I was about to walk through the door of our apartment, Antoine held me back one last time. "Isabelle, I'm really sorry for everything. I'll talk to my mother. I'll make things right." I smiled sadly. "It's not up to you, Antoine. It's up to me to take back control of my life." With those words, I left our apartment. My heart was heavy but strangely liberated. In the elevator, I took out my phone to call Marie. It was still early, but I knew she'd understand. "Hello?" Her sleepy voice answered after a few rings. "Marie, it's me. I'm sorry to call you so early, but I need a place to stay." There was a brief silence at the other end of the line. Then Marie said, "Come over right away. I'll put the coffee on." I felt a surge of gratitude toward my friend. "Thanks, Marie." In the cab taking me to Marie's, I watched the streets of Paris go by, still decorated for the holidays. The garlands and illuminated trees now seem cruelly ironic. Christmas, the celebration of family and love, had been the catalyst for my decision to leave everything behind. When I arrived at Marie's house, I was greeted by her warm embrace. Without a word, she ushered me in and guided me to her sofa. She placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of me and sat down beside me, waiting patiently until I was ready to speak. "I've left Antoine," I finally said, breaking the silence. Marie nodded, showing no surprise. "Because of his family?" I nodded, then unpacked everything. Christmas dinner, the lack of a present, Gazelle's cruel words. Marie listened without interrupting, her face reflecting anger, sadness, and indignation. "Oh, Isabelle," she said when I was done. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that, but I'm proud of you for making this decision." Her words warmed my heart. For the first time since the day before, I felt I had made the right choice. "What are you going to do now?" asked Marie. I took a sip of coffee, pondering the question. "I don't know yet, but I do know one thing. I can't go on like this anymore. I can't be this diminished version of myself anymore." Marie put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You're right. You deserve so much better, Isabelle. You're brilliant and talented, and you should never have to feel like nothing to anyone." His words echoed a thought that had been growing in my mind since I woke up. "You know," I said slowly, "I've always wanted to start my own digital marketing company. Maybe now's the time." Marie's face lit up. "That's a great idea. You've always been good at that, and you have contacts in the business, don't you?" I nodded, feeling a spark of excitement ignite within me for the first time in a long time. "Yes, I've kept in touch with several former clients, and I have some savings I set aside just in case." "In case you need to escape?" Marie guessed shrewdly. I smiled weakly. I suppose I did. Maybe part of me knew this day would come. Marie hugged me. "You're going to make it, Isabelle. You're stronger than you think, and I'll be there for you every step of the way." Her words gave me courage. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt like more than just someone's daughter-in-law or wife. I was Isabelle, a woman with dreams, ambitions, and the strength to make them come true. Sitting on Marie's sofa with my suitcase at my feet and a cup of coffee in hand, I felt a wave of determination wash over me. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. Despite the pain and uncertainty, I was ready to face it. "Marie," I said, "I think I'm going to need a laptop and lots of coffee. We have a business to start." Marie laughed, her eyes shining with pride and excitement. "Now that's the Isabelle I know. Come on, let's get to work." So, in my best friend's small apartment, the day after a disastrous Christmas, I began to regain control of my life. I knew it would be a long and difficult road, and there would be moments of doubt, fear, and maybe even regret. But one thing was certain. I was not nothing. I was Isabelle, and I was ready to show the world, and myself, what I was capable of. The days following my arrival at Marie's were a whirlwind of activity. Between drawing up my business plan and calling my old professional contacts, I hardly had time to think about Antoine or his family. Yet I knew this bubble of relative peace wouldn't last forever. On the morning of the 5th day, reality caught up with me. My phone buzzed, displaying a message from Antoine. "Isabelle, we need to talk. I'll be at Marie's in an hour. Please, don't go." My heart quickened. Part of me wanted to flee to avoid this confrontation, but I knew it was inevitable and perhaps necessary. "Is everything okay?" Marie asked, noticing my troubled expression. I showed her the message. She nodded in understanding. "Do you want me to stay?" "No," I replied after a moment's thought. "This is something I have to face alone." The next hour felt like the longest of my life. I tried to concentrate on my work, but my thoughts kept returning to Antoine, what he was going to say, and how I would respond. When the doorbell rang, I jumped despite myself. Marie hugged me briefly before leaving the apartment, leaving me alone to face what was to come. I opened the door, my heart pounding. Antoine stood there, looking tired and anxious. His eyes immediately fell on my suitcase still in the hallway. "You haven't unpacked," he remarked gently. "I know," I admitted. "I don't know how long I'll be here yet." He nodded in understanding. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside to let him in. We sat on the sofa, an uncomfortable space between us. "Isabelle," he began, "I'm so sorry for everything that's happened. I spoke to my mother. I told her her behavior was unacceptable. A wave of frustration rose inside me. Antoine, it's not up to you to sort this out. It's not just your mother's issue. It's deeper than that. He looked at me, puzzled. What do you mean? I took a deep breath. Since we've been married, I feel like I've lost a part of myself. I've tried so hard to fit in with your family and match their expectations that I've forgotten who I really am. His eyes filled with sadness. I didn't want you to change for me or my family. I love you just the way you are. I know you love me, I replied softly, but sometimes love isn't enough. I need to find myself again, to go back to being the strong, independent woman I used to be. He reached out to take my hand, but stopped halfway, unsure. And you think you can't do it with me? This question hit me hard. Could I rebuild my life while remaining married to Antoine? Was it possible to reconcile my love for him with my need for freedom? I don't know, I admitted honestly. All I know is that I need space and time to think. Antoine nodded slowly, pain visible in his eyes. I understand, but Isabelle, I want you to know that I'm willing to do anything to make it work between us. If you want us to distance ourselves from my family, we will. If you want us to move to another city, I'll go with you. I don't want to lose you. His words touched me deeply. I knew he was sincere, and part of me wanted to throw myself into his arms and forget everything else. But I couldn't. Antoine, thank you for this. I really do appreciate it, but it's not up to you to make these sacrifices. It's up to me to find out who I am and what I really want. He nodded, resigned. What about your job? Are you going back to the office? I took a deep breath. It was time to tell him about my plans. Actually, I've decided to start my own digital marketing company. His eyes widened in surprise. Really? Since when? Since I've been here, I replied. I've been thinking about it for a long time, but I never dared take the plunge. Now I feel ready. Antoine looked at me with a mixture of pride and sadness. You've always been brilliant at this. I'm sure you'll succeed. His support, even in these difficult circumstances, moved me. Thank you, Antoine. An uncomfortable silence fell between us. There were so many things left unsaid, so many unresolved emotions. Finally, Antoine stood up. I suppose I should be going. But Isabelle, promise me one thing. What? I asked, my heart clenching. Don't make a final decision just yet. Give us a chance. Give yourself time to really think about what you want. I nodded, unable to speak. He leaned over to kiss me on the forehead, a tender gesture that reminded me why I had married him in the first place. As he headed for the door, I found the strength to speak. Antoine, wait. He turned around, hope shining in his eyes. I'm going back to the apartment tonight to pick up a few things. He nodded. All right. Do you want me to be there? I shook my head. No, I'd rather go alone, but maybe we could have dinner together afterward to talk. A small smile lit up his face. I'd love that. After he left, I sat on the sofa, lost in thought. The conversation had been difficult but necessary. Now, I had another ordeal to face, going back to our apartment that evening. I took a cab home, every familiar street bringing back memories, some happy, some painful. When I arrived in front of our building, I hesitated for a moment before entering. The apartment was silent and dark when I opened the door. I turned on the lights and was struck by the familiarity of the place. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, yet everything seemed different. I started gathering a few things I needed: clothes, important documents, and a few personal items. Every object I touched was loaded with memories, making the task emotionally exhausting. As I finished filling my bag, I heard voices in the corridor, voices I knew all too well. Antoine, are you there? Gazelle's voice echoed through the door. My heart stopped. What were they doing here? Had Antoine told them I was coming? Before I could decide what to do, the door opened. Gazelle entered, followed by Jean-Pierre and Antoine, who seemed as surprised as I was to see me there. Isabelle, said Gazelle, her tone oscillating between surprise and contempt. What are you doing here? I straightened my shoulders, determined not to be intimidated. I came to pick up a few things. What about you? Antoine quickly intervened. Mom, Dad, I told you it wasn't the right time to come. Gazelle ignored him, her eyes fixed on me. So, it's true, you've really left Antoine. How dare you do this to him after all he's done for you? I felt anger rise within me but took a deep breath to calm myself. Gazelle, with all due respect, this is between Antoine and me. No, she retorted dryly, this concerns the whole family. You can't just walk away without thinking about the consequences. Jean-Pierre put a hand on his wife's shoulder. Gazelle, maybe we should let them talk. But Gazelle was on a roll. You really are nothing without us, aren't you? Where are you going to go? What are you going to do? Those words, the same ones she'd spoken on Christmas Eve, rekindled all my pain and anger. But this time, I was ready to face it. I'm not nothing, I said, my voice shaky but firm. I have my own worth, my own dreams, and I don't need your approval to exist. Antoine approached me, placing himself between his mother and me. Maron, that's enough. I told you your behavior towards Isabelle was unacceptable. Gazelle seemed shocked by her son's reaction. Antoine, you can't be serious. This woman abandons you, and you defend her? Yes, he replied simply, because I love her, and because she deserves to be treated with respect. A heavy silence fell over the room. I looked at Antoine, moved by his unexpected support. Then I picked up my bag and headed for the door. I'm leaving, I announced. Antoine, I'll call you later so we can talk. As I was about to walk through the door, Gazelle took a step toward me. If you walk out that door, don't even think about coming back. I turned to look her straight in the eye. Gazelle, I'm not coming back for you. If I ever come back, it will be for Antoine and only for him. With that, I left the apartment, leaving behind a deafening silence. In the elevator, I felt tears rolling down my cheeks, but for the first time in a long time, they weren't tears of sadness or frustration. They were tears of relief, of liberation. As I left the building, I took a deep breath of the fresh Parisian night air. I didn't know what the future held for me, but I did know one thing. I was ready to face it, strong in who I really was. The weeks that followed this intense confrontation were a whirlwind of emotions and activities. I found a small studio to rent, a modest place that belonged to me, a space where I could finally breathe and find myself. Every day, I worked hard on my business project, contacting former clients, developing marketing strategies, and learning to navigate the complex world of entrepreneurship. The nights were often long and lonely, filled with doubts and questions. Had I made the right decision? Was I really capable of succeeding on my own? And then there was Antoine. We talked regularly, short, awkward conversations at first, which gradually became longer and deeper. He respected my need for space, but I sensed he was still hoping for reconciliation. One morning, as I was working on a presentation for a potential client, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Hello? I replied, intrigued. Isabelle? The voice on the other end sounded vaguely familiar. It's Sophie, Matt's wife, Antoine's sister-in-law. My heart sank. Why was she calling me? Had something happened to Antoine? Sophie, is everything all right? I asked, worried. Yes, everything's fine, she replied quickly. Actually, I wanted to talk to you. Is there any way we could get together? It's important. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse and cut all ties with Antoine's family, but curiosity won out. Okay, I finally said. Where and when? We agreed to meet at a small cafe near my new studio. The whole way there, I wondered what Sophie could possibly want with me. We'd never been particularly close, but she'd always been the kindest of the family to me. When I arrived at the cafe, Sophie was already there, sitting at a table in the corner and looking nervous. She gave me a little wave when she saw me come in. Thank you for coming, she said, as I sat down across from her. You're welcome, I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. What did you want to talk to me about? Sophie took a deep breath. First, I wanted to apologize for everything that happened at Christmas and for the way the family treated you. It wasn't fair. I was caught off guard by her apology. Thank you, Sophie, but you don't have to apologize for the others. She shook her head. Yes, I have to because I should have said something. I should have defended you, but I was afraid of Gazelle. We all were. I felt a wave of compassion wash over me. I'd never really considered how much Gazelle could affect other family members too. So why are you telling me all this now? I asked softly. She took a sip of her coffee before answering. Because your leaving changed a lot of things, Isabelle. Antoine. He's not the same. He's standing up to his mother now, questioning a lot of things in the family, and it's had a domino effect on all of us. I listened, stunned, as Sophie told me how, since I'd left, the family dynamic had completely changed. Antoine had confronted his mother on several occasions, demanding that she respect me and change her behavior. Matt and Jean-Pierre had begun to speak out too, questioning the hold Gazelle had had over the family for so long. And Gazelle? I asked, curious despite myself. Sophie gave a sad little smile. She's lost. I think she's finally realizing the impact of her actions. She's even started seeing a therapist. This news shocked me. Gazelle, the proud and unyielding, in therapy. It was hard to imagine. Isabelle, Sophie continued, I know you've suffered, and you have every right not to want anything more to do with us. But I wanted you to know that your departure was like an electroshock for the family, and Antoine still loves you. He's determined to change things to create an environment where you feel respected and valued. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. This was everything I'd ever wanted, to be accepted, respected, and loved for who I really was. But was it too late? I don't know what to say, Sophie, I admitted. All this, it's a lot to take in. She put her hand on mine. I understand. I just wanted you to know that the door is open if you ever want to come back, not just for Antoine but for yourself. You deserve to be happy. After this deeply moving conversation with Sophie, I went home with my mind in turmoil. The next few days were a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. On one hand, I was proud of what I'd achieved on my own. My business was starting to take off. I'd signed my first contracts and felt stronger and more independent than ever. On the other hand, Sophie's words resonated within me, rekindling feelings I tried to bury. One evening, while working late on a project, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Antoine. I know you need your space, but I'd like to talk to you. No pressure, just a chat when you're ready. I stared at the screen for long minutes, my heart pounding. Was I ready? Could I consider giving him another chance? Finally, I made a decision. I replied, okay. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m. in the park near my new studio. His response was almost immediate. I'll be there. Thank you, Isabelle. The next evening, I waited for Antoine on a park bench watching couples and families enjoying the balmy evening. When I saw him arrive, my heart skipped a beat. He looked tired, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. Hi, he said softly as he sat down next to me. Hi, I replied, surprised by how calm my voice sounded despite my inner anxiety. We remained silent for a while, watching the sunset over Paris. How are you? He finally asked. Good, I replied honestly. My business is taking off. I've signed some interesting contracts. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. I'm really happy for you, Isabelle. You've always been brilliant. I knew you'd make it. His sincere support touched me more than I cared to admit. What about you? I asked. How are you? He took a deep breath. It's been difficult but also revealing. Your departure forced me to question a lot of things, my relationship with my family, my own priorities. I nodded, encouraging him to continue. I realized how much of a coward I had been. He continued. I should have stood up for you. I should have stood up to my mother much sooner. I'm sorry, Isabelle, so sorry. His words, full of sincerity, melted some of the ice that had formed around my heart. Sophie talked to me, I admitted. She told me things had changed in your family. Antoine nodded. Yes, it's true. It hasn't been easy, but we've had long conversations, confrontations sometimes. My mother, she's beginning to understand the damage she's done. She's in therapy now. I was surprised to hear this confirmation. And how do you feel about all this? He thought for a moment before answering. Relieved, I suppose, and hopeful. For the first time in a long time, I feel like my family could become what I've always wanted it to be. Loving, understanding, close-knit. His words moved me, but I also felt a touch of apprehension. Antoine, I'm happy for you. I really am, but you're scared, he finished for me. I understand, Isabel. I'm not asking you to come back right away or even to forgive me immediately. I just wanted you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to regain your trust if you'll give me a chance. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I need time, Antoine. I've discovered a strength in myself that I didn't know existed, and I don't want to lose it. He took my hand gently. I don't want you to lose it either. I love you, Isabel, the strong, independent, brilliant woman you are. I want to be by your side, not as someone who holds you back, but as a partner who supports you. His words touched something in me, rekindling feelings I had tried to bury. But I had also learned to be careful. I need to think about it, I said softly. Maybe we could start with small steps, dinners, conversations, learning to rediscover each other. Antoine's face lit up with hope. I'd love that. As we stood up to part, Antoine looked at me with an intensity that reminded me why I had fallen in love with him in the first place. Isabel, he said, whatever you decide, know that I'm proud of you, for what you've accomplished, for the woman you've become. You're not nothing without us. You're extraordinary in your own right. Those words, so different from the ones I had heard that Christmas Eve, resonated with me long after we parted. As I drove home that evening, I realized that the future I had imagined when I left Antoine's apartment weeks earlier was taking on an unexpected shape. I didn't yet know where this new chapter would take me. Perhaps toward reconciliation with Antoine and his family, or perhaps toward a completely new and independent life. But one thing was certain. I had found my voice, my strength, and I would never lose it again. Whatever the future held, I would face it true to myself, armed with the most important lesson this ordeal had taught me. I was not nothing. I was everything. And that was more than enough. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that choosing myself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. For too long, I tried to fit into a place that never truly welcomed me, waiting for approval that was never going to come. But the truth is, I never needed their validation. I had value long before I became someone's wife or daughter-in-law. I had dreams, ambitions, and a voice that I let others silence. Never again. If I could give anyone advice from my experience, it would be this. You don't have to stay where you are not respected. You don't owe anyone your happiness just to keep the peace. The moment you realize your own worth is the moment you take back control of your life. It's scary, yes, but it's also freeing. And for the first time in a long time, I feel free. Good luck. And never forget who you are.